London, 1887. The city wakes beneath a blanket of fog so thick it swallows the gas lamps. Along the banks of the Thames, bargemen drag ropes through the murky water, guiding their vessels through the dawn mist. But something bumps against a wooden pier. Soft, heavy, unyielding. When they pull it free, the current gives up its offering. The torso of a woman, pale, mutilated, wrapped in cloth as if the river itself had tried to hide her. The faces of the men twist in silence. No one speaks. They only stare. The police arrive, baffled. There is no head, no hands, no name. Newspapers scream of monsters, but behind closed doors the whispers begin. This is no accident, and this is no isolated horror. The cuts are precise, the body carefully prepared. Whoever did this understood anatomy, maybe even enjoyed it. As the city trembles, the Thames rolls on, a silent accomplice carrying secrets beneath the fog. Somewhere along its winding path, another body part drifts toward shore. Another clue, another warning. But this wasn't the first, and it would not be the last. Before London knew the name Jack the Ripper, another killer moved unseen through the smoke and river mist, colder, quieter, and far more deliberate. And what the river revealed was only half the truth. Victorian London in the 1880s was a city of contradictions, gleaming progress above ground and festering decay below it. Smoke poured endlessly from the chimneys of factories, turning daylight to dusk. The streets stank of coal dust, horse manure, and rot. Under the surface of that new industrial power lay a darkness no one wished to face. A darkness that crept through its alleys, its tenements, and most of all, its river. The Thames was the city's pride and shame. It carried wealth, trade, and life to the empire. But it also carried away its dead. People called it the city's bloodstream, because everything flowed through it. But to those who lived by its banks, it was something else entirely. A graveyard in motion, swallowing the secrets that polite society refused to see. At dawn, mist drifted over the water like a burial shroud, and sometimes it brought things back. London was overrun with poverty. Families of 6 lived in one-room shacks, sleeping beside open sewers. Disease, hunger, and desperation turned people into ghosts long before death came. Women disappeared from the slums nightly, some driven to the streets for survival, others simply vanishing into the labyrinth of fog. The upper class looked away, comfortable in their parlors, while the poor drowned in the city's own waste. The police, ill-equipped and undertrained, were little more than watchmen with notebooks. There were no fingerprints, no crime labs, no science to help them. Crimes were solved by rumor, not by evidence. And when the river began giving up body parts, investigators were as horrified as the public. But they had no tools to make sense of the horror. The city itself seemed to breathe corruption. Prostitutes lined the gas-lit corners, men stumbled drunk through the alleys, and shadows watched from behind the grime of window glass. It was here, amid this chaos, that the first body drifted ashore, setting the stage for a terror that would stain the century. And though history would come to remember the name Jack the Ripper, his legend was not the firstborn from the fog. Before him, there was someone else, quieter, crueler, and forgotten. It began quietly, as most horrors do. On a gray April morning in 1887, a bargeman near Rainham noticed something snagged among the reeds along the Thames. At first, he thought it was rubbish, a burlap sack, maybe refuse from one of the factories that lined the river. But when the constable slit the wrapping open, the river's secret spilled out. Inside was the torso of a woman, pale, waterlogged, cleanly severed. No head, no arms, no legs. Just a body reduced to silence. The discovery sent a shiver through London's constables. They had seen murders before, but not like this. There were no wounds of struggle, no frenzy. Whoever had done this worked with patience and precision. The coroner's report confirmed their dread. The cuts were deliberate, expertly made. Flesh separated from bone with surgical accuracy. It wasn't rage. It was skill, yet no missing persons report fit the remains. The victim seemed to have no name, no trace. Women went missing often in London's slums, but none had been reported so near to Rainham. Police combed through brothels, factories, and dockyards for clues, but the city swallowed its own. As days passed, the Thames began returning its offerings. A thigh surfaced near Woolwich, an arm tangled in the ropes of a ferry. A foot drifted ashore at Greenwich. Piece by piece, the river unwrapped its horror. And yet, one thing remained missing: the head. The face that could have told them who she was. Newspapers seized on the story immediately. Headlines screamed, "The river's offering," and "A mysterious torso found in the fog." Sketches of the mutilated remains filled front pages, turning tragedy into spectacle. Some readers treated it like fiction, a gothic nightmare to discuss over breakfast. But the police knew it was real, and they knew they were powerless. Theories spread like smoke. Some said a butcher, others a ship's surgeon, even a sailor with knowledge of tides and tools. The precision suggested anatomy training, someone who knew not just how to cut, but how to keep the pieces from being found all at once. The most chilling idea came from a river inspector who noticed how the remains always surfaced near specific bends of the Thames. Not too far, not too close. He muttered that whoever disposed of the body must have known the current intimately. He knew exactly where the river would give it back. The killer, it seemed, wasn't hiding from the city. He was speaking to it, through the water, through the tide, through the quiet return of what he'd taken. By the autumn of 1888, London was already a city trembling under fear. The name Jack the Ripper had begun to crawl across newspaper headlines, and the East End had turned into a hunting ground for rumor. But while the Ripper haunted the alleys of Whitechapel, another, quieter terror was at work. One that did not stab or slash in frenzy, but dissected with the calm precision of a man performing a ritual. On October 2nd, 1888, a laborer working on the foundations of the new Scotland Yard headquarters, the very heart of London's police force, stumbled upon a wooden box hidden deep in the construction vaults. When the lid was pried open, the stench made the men reel back. Inside lay a woman's torso, neatly severed, partially decomposed, and carefully wrapped in cloth. The killer had left his work just a few feet from where detectives would soon walk the halls of British law. It was a grotesque joke, one that no one in the yard could ignore. The irony was too cruel. While London's finest hunted one murderer through the shadows of Whitechapel, another had placed his victim right beneath their feet. Police searched the vault and nearby embankments, and soon more pieces surfaced: an arm, a leg, fragments of cloth and flesh. Each discovery painted the same haunting picture: a woman dismembered with expertise, her identity erased by precision. No head was ever found. The coroner noted the same chilling trademarks that had defined the Rainham case a year earlier: identical methods of cutting, the same care in removing limbs, even similar wrapping material. It was as if the killer was signing his work. The city erupted in panic. Newspapers that had already fed on Ripper, hysteria now spoke of another butcher in London. The L'Obéissue Star dubbed it the Thames Torso Mystery, while others called it the River Murders. Crowds gathered at the embankments, hoping to catch sight of detectives, or worse, another clue washing ashore. Women whispered of a new monster who stalked not the alleys, but the tide itself. The thought that such horrors could happen right next to Scotland Yard, that the killer could stand in the same fog as the men who hunted him, chilled the city to its bones. But the press only made it worse. They called him a new Ripper, though this one worked with calculation, not chaos. He didn't crave blood in the street. He wanted control. His victims weren't left to be found screaming in gutters. They were carefully placed, disassembled, turned into puzzles. Then came the realization that silenced the room. The Rainham remains and the Whitehall torso had been cut by the same hand. The same precision, the same intimate understanding of anatomy. Whoever this was, he was still out there. And the river, once again, was keeping his secret. By the summer of 1889, the Thames had developed a reputation that no amount of sunlight could wash away. The people of London began to treat the river not as water, but as something alive, a creature with moods, one that swallowed secrets and spat them back when it grew restless. It had been 2 years since Rainham, 1 year since Whitehall, and the city dared to hope that perhaps the nightmare had drifted downstream for good. But in September, that illusion sank beneath the tide. Beneath the Hungerford Bridge, where the fog gathered thickest, a man repairing mooring lines spotted a dark shape wedged against a pier. He prodded it with his pole, expecting debris. What surfaced instead froze him to the spot. A human arm, pale as wax, still wrapped in fragments of coarse cloth. Within hours, police combed the embankment. The search turned up more remains. Both legs, a section of torso, and, as always, no head. It was the same method, the same careful precision. Not a butcher's work, not rage, not madness, a pattern. When the autopsy was performed, the coroner immediately noted the familiar signature. Every incision mirrored those of the Rainham and Whitehall victims. Whoever was doing this had a practiced hand, one that worked quickly, confidently, almost professionally. The dismemberment wasn't random. It followed a structure, as if performed by someone trained to separate limb from joint with minimal damage. Soon, rumors swirled of witnesses. Dock workers who spoke of seeing a tall man in a long coat and top hat near the riverbanks before dawn, hauling sacks into the fog. Some dismissed it as paranoia, yet others swore it was true. He moved like he belonged there, they said, like someone who knew the tides. That image, a solitary figure tossing parcels into the river at first light, haunted London's imagination. The killer, it seemed, was not just skilled, but methodical. He knew how long the current would keep his secrets, and when it would bring them back. As investigators dug deeper, one theory began to take hold. Perhaps this wasn't a random murderer at all. Perhaps he was part of a world few dared to speak of, the underground trade of anatomy and cadavers. In Victorian London, the demand for bodies was high. Medical schools, surgeons, and private institutions needed specimens for study. Though the law forbade grave robbing, the practice never truly stopped. Resurrectionists, body snatchers, supplied corpses to doctors who paid in silence. Some wondered if the Thames Torso killer was one of them, a surgeon turned supplier, desensitized to flesh, driven beyond the boundary between experiment and murder. But if that was true, then this killer wasn't just taking lives. He was dissecting humanity itself, cutting the line between the living and the dead for reasons only he understood. And with each new tide, the river whispered back the same message: he was still here. By 1890, the Thames had become both a witness and a liar. Every tide washed away a little truth. Every current whispered fragments of a name no one could recall. Investigators, desperate for answers, began mapping patterns that bled across London's anatomy. Docks, bridges, hospitals, each mark like a wound stitched into the city's flesh. Among the suspects, 3 names circulated in shadowed whispers. The first, a surgeon from the medical school whose hands knew too much about the human body. His colleagues described him as brilliant yet withdrawn, often vanishing for nights on end. When questioned, he simply smiled and said, "The Thames keeps its secrets." The second, a riverboat ferryman, quiet and strong, who moved between piers after midnight. He knew every curve of the river, every eddy that could swallow a body whole. Witnesses claimed he once worked in the dissecting rooms, hauling corpses for study. When asked about the stench of the water, he would only mutter, "You learn to stop smelling it." And the third, perhaps the most disturbing, was no single man at all, but the notion that several killers might have borrowed the same method. The press speculated that one began it, and the rest mimicked the horror, as if evil itself had become contagious. The police, under pressure and untrained for such precision crimes, stumbled through dark alleys of speculation. Files vanished. Reports contradicted each other. Pieces of evidence were lost in the flood of bureaucracy, while others were quietly buried under silence. Scotland Yard's reputation trembled, and the city's faith in justice eroded like the riverbank at dawn. But through the fog of speculation, one truth emerged. These murders were not the work of a man enraged, but of someone ritualistic. Each incision, each careful wrapping, each disposal point along the Thames formed a macabre rhythm, a methodical, almost reverent sequence. It was as though the killer wasn't just hiding bodies, but performing a ceremony. Psychologists of the modern age would later call it compulsion. But in Victorian London, it was something closer to religion, a dark devotion acted out upon the city itself. As the story faded into archives, so did the victims. No names were attached to their remains, no graves marked their passing. Only fragments were catalogued, stacked, and forgotten in medical ledgers. They were mothers, daughters, lovers. And yet history remembered them only as parts: a leg, an arm, a torso. The Thames still moves through London like a slow pulse. Beneath its brown surface, it carries centuries of secrets. And somewhere, beneath the mud and the iron bridges, what the river hid may still rest, waiting for someone to remember that, before Jack, there was another. The Thames flows still, slow, patient, eternal. Its surface ripples with the same dull gray sheen that once reflected the lamps of Victorian London. Beneath it, the current hums with centuries of secrets, winding through the heart of a city that long ago learned how to forget. The world remembers Jack. His name echoes in books, films, and whispers across cobblestone tours. But the one who came before him, the one who carved silence into the river, was never given a name. No letters, no taunts, no face. Only precision, only ritual. Only the quiet sound of water closing over a sack in the fog. As London rose from soot to steel, his story sank deeper, buried under newer crimes and louder legends. But the river remembers. It always does. The same waters that licked the stone arches of Hungerford and Battersea still move beneath the bridges tonight, carrying with them the breath of the nameless. Look closely at an old map of the Thames, at the red dots marking Rainham, Whitehall, the Embankment, Battersea. Each point is a wound, each ripple a memory, and if you listen long enough, through the hum of traffic and the hiss of rain, you might still hear it. The slow, rhythmic pulse of the water, steady as a heartbeat, echoing the story of a killer the fog never released. The river flows on, and London, beneath its quiet surface, still bleeds.